What, if anything, can we learn from the positioning of countries on the list of contributors and about changes that may have occurred? Here are the findings concerning the 9 first countries, admittedly a totally arbitrary number, in decreasing order. First one is Germany, 12%. Then the UK, 11%. Belgium, 9%. Finland, 9%. Israel, 8%. Spain, 7%. The USA, 4.5%. France, 3.5%. 70% out of these 10 articles were written by Daniel Gilles. Hong Kong, 3%. So this is altogether the 9 first places, 197 articles, more than 2/3 of the articles. I must admit that when I came up with this result, I had a few surprises. I never realized that this would be the distribution of contributing countries. To be sure, even if one has a notion as to what would be desirable in the daily making of a even if one has a notion as to what would be desirable in the daily making of periodicals, one works first and foremost with what is available. Needless to say, personal relations are of utmost importance here, and we all have only a limited and necessarily biased number of those. This explains, at least in part, the primacy of the first 5 contributing countries. Germany, because that's why I started planning the journal. The UK, especially since Kirsten Malmkier joined the editorial team. Belgium, Finland, and Israel. The marginality of a number of countries seems significant too, especially as far as countries that represent real powers on an international scale is concerned, including a heavy presence in academia. First and foremost among those is maybe the former Soviet Union and today's Russia, towards the bottom of the list with altogether 3 articles. For rather obvious reasons, I should say, which have nothing to do with target. Others that I would mention briefly are Japan, Korea, Portugal, Sweden, and Turkey. In view of what we know about the role these countries have played in modern translation studies, we would have expected to have a more massive role in the international scene. Apparently, more contacts with scholars of these countries are needed to bring about changes in this picture on both institutionalized and individual levels. The place occupied by the United States of America is the 7th, which is not surprising in view of at least 2 complementary things. One, the overall marginality of the USA in the world of translation studies, especially as it was conceived of in Target's ideological platform. And 2, the aforementioned Eurocentricity of what the journal reflected, which is something I've already mentioned. Just a moment, please. To be sure, there was no boycott involved here like the one we know from at least one other periodical in our field. In fact, when it became topical, the whole thing of the boycott, I nicknamed Target the journal that boycotts no one. It is not even as if we never tried to get in touch with colleagues in those and other countries, because we did. It is only that, to the extent that manuscripts were submitted in the first place, these manuscripts tended to be rather dated in their approach, in their theoretical framework and methodology, and or poorly written. I would also like to emphasize that Target was never meant to be a venue for star writers. In fact, quite a number of stars had their articles sent back to them, but I have already explained why I would hold my tongue in this matter. On the other hand, we have always encouraged new writers to submit their studies, not only doctoral students, but young people working on their MA thesis as well. We seem to have advanced a little in our observations. However, putting 20 years in one lump is frustrating to any attempt to sketch processes of entering the list, moving up and down it, or having it, or leaving it altogether. Here are some highlights. For this purpose, the 20 volumes of Target have been divided into 4 4-volume blocks, which is another arbitrary number. I could have tried to play with other blocks. I think that the results would have been almost the same. But it looked to me as a waste of time. Okay, now I should have had a transparency or something, but I don't have it. I have a table summarizing the 8 countries per each 4-volume block, and I'm only going to give you some highlights from this table now. Germany starts very high. First place with a full third of all articles, a supremacy which was never going to be equaled by any other country in any other period. So in the first 4 volumes, a third of the articles were written by German scholars, most of them not in German but in English. It retains its first place in the second and third periods while going down to 13.3 and 11.5% of the production respectively. It then drops to 8th place with as little as 5% of the articles and end up out of the top part of the list. This trajectory seems very significant. Apparently the position of Germany in the world of translation studies has gone down. Then again, the percentage of German scholars of the newer generation who are publishing in English has not increased much. We have heard the same claims made yesterday in a different context. And I'm not sure, I have numbers to back them. Spain shows an almost reverse curve. It's not represented at all in the first period. It then appears on the 6th place with 5% and goes gradually up to the 4th place with 8.2% and to the 2nd and 3rd places with 12 and 9.5% respectively. As I've already seen, that process shows signs of continuation now. The UK starts on the 5th place with 5.9% of the articles. It then climbs up to the 3rd and 2nd places with 10 and 11.5% respectively, and end up on the very first place with 13.5 translation. As to the USA, it rarely appears in the upper part of the list and never higher than the 7th place. Let us move to another observation now. It has often been claimed that translation has become a feminine occupation. This claim seems to be true for most cultures, especially in the last few decades. Does it have any repercussions for the status of translation studies? Is the discipline, or is it getting to be feminine? And what has Target got to tell us in this respect? You will have to believe me that when I say that gender has never been a consideration in the acceptance or rejection of articles for publication. It's a matter of faith. That's what I claim, and you won't be able to prove or disprove it. So would it be a hypothesis, or? Nevertheless, the findings in this respect are not uninteresting. They certainly show a change along the time axis. Thus, out of the first 12 issues, 1989 and until 1993, 11 were men-dominated. I'll skip the tables, the exact numbers. There was one exception, volume 4.2, but this deviance from the dominant pattern cannot be assigned any historical significance. It certainly marks no change of orientation. From volume 7 on, the number of women authors has been growing constantly, and we have about the same number of male and female-dominated issues. The last issue so far, the second issue of volume 20, features 9 women contributors and only 1 man, and I wonder whether this marks yet another enhancement of the relative weight of women authors. Again, it would be interesting to compare the number of men and women authors in the articles that were rejected. Also, eventually, the significance of the findings concerning Target will have to be confronted with the numbers revealed by other periodicals, collections of articles, and programs of conference. Thus, for instance, the Festschrift in my honor, which was published a few months ago, has a proportion of 16 female to 13 male authors, and the Festschrift for Miriam Schlesinger, a proportion of 8 men to 9 women. By contrast, the volume of proceedings of the Fourth S Congress contained 21 articles by women and only 5 by men. Another parameter of potential interest could be the role played by researchers who are gay. Unfortunately, or not really unfortunately, I cannot contribute anything to such a discussion. I have to admit that I was never really interested in who of my colleagues were gay, so I'm simply uninformed in that matter. So this stopped without a summary. The more material that I prepared for discussion, I'll just pick up one item, which is possibility of comparing the countries that contributed to Target with the order of countries that bought, subscribed to Target, to the paper edition, not to what goes on the internet, because I have no access to numbers there. Interestingly enough, it's not the same pattern. It's not the same countries that contribute articles as those that I wouldn't say read. I don't know who reads the periodical, but I know who pays for it and who gets it for free or as an exchange agreement and so on. And I cannot give you numbers because I was sworn to secrecy. I think I even signed the document. I'm not sure. It was 20 years ago. Okay, so thank you very much. If you can make this as a topic of discussion, I would be glad to. Maybe there's a representative of the youngest periodical in the field sitting next to me. Maybe she could react and say it's similar, it's different. We have started where you have done part of the work for us in the last first 20 years or whatever. Thank you.